Hi there, it's a common magician, and it's another discussion here today. It's again more philosophy. I think some people like these kinds of videos. It's hit or miss sometimes. I'll notice that sometimes I'll talk philosophy and people kind of leave it. Other times, depending on what I'm talking about, people have an interest in it. This is a follow-up from a couple of previous videos here that I've done. And again, I'm just a guy telling you what I think. I'm not the authority really on any of this stuff. I can only tell you what I experience and what I think about what I experience and how it helps me. And if you're in my position, or if you have similar experiences, then hopefully it can help you. Or even better, you can add to the discussion or add your own experience to it. Certainly do that in the comments section as we have on the channel. A couple things that I've been talking about lately. One has to do with dealing with the kind of, not really the heckler situation, but sort of those smarty pants people, as I call them, that like to call out everything that's going on, and right or wrong. Sometimes it's even worse when you have a person that just incorrectly identifies the method for everything you're doing, right? And it's just all the wrong answers. And it's just a big distraction. How do you deal with those moments? And the other discussion I had recently was about a particular kind of mentalist presentation that seems quite math and process heavy. There's a lot of process in the sort of presentation for a payoff in the end of a very singular effect that happens somewhere down the road after a lot of process has happened. And I actually believe in magic like that. I think magic like that can work very well. And it seems like there's a contradiction here between these two talks that I've given, because in the one, you'll note one of the things I talked about was talking less. One thing that can help in those kind of heckler situations is just talking less, saying fewer things. And I got a couple questions on that. I do want to distinguish, though, what I'm talking about. I'm not sure I was clear, and that's entirely my fault. When I say talk less, what I'm referring to is the kind of talking that doesn't help. There's a lot of things that magicians say that really doesn't help with the presentation or the effect, and it can often hurt. It can actually harm the effect because it tips off the method. What I mean by that is I think you need to talk less unless it makes the effect much, much better. And I'll get into that in a minute. There's a lot of things that you can say. You can spend quite a lot of time speaking, and it really only increases the effect in the end. And there's a certain type of talking that does that, and a certain type of talking that gets in the way. And I will talk about that in a minute. Before, though, we get into it, and we talk about this process-heavy presentation stuff and talking, what kind of talking is good, and how you get good at talking, I want to quickly distinguish what is real magic. And I can't answer that. There's a Staniforth book. I think This Is Real Magic is what it's called. It's a great book. I highly recommend it to read it. It doesn't really tell you anything about method at all. It's really a kind of an autobiographical sort of journal that Nate Staniforth put together some years ago, talking about the experience of magic and where he finds it. And I'm not really giving off anything that he concludes. This is just kind of how I see the problem of what real magic is. I think real magic is found in the aesthetics of something, in the surreal experience. It's found in the exhibition of difficult tasks, like technical music, highly technical music, right? Gives an aesthetic kind of experience, a surreal experience. The performance of high-level athletics, right? Seeing somebody accomplish something that is just almost inhuman, right? It gives that aesthetic, surreal experience in that exhibition. Juggling, right, is quite magical. And you'll hear jugglers and magicians talk about that, and magicians who do juggling, that juggling is something that is difficult. And while a lot of magic and method can be very difficult, particularly with cards and sleights and whatnot, in the end, magic is about doing something that looks impossible, but obviously it is not, right? You can learn magic that is stupid easy, to accomplish. You can make a living on that, and creating that kind of magical moment when doing really nothing that is difficult. Whereas you can't do juggling unless you do juggling. This is one of the reasons why I think cardistry is magical. Cardistry is merely juggling with cards. I don't say merely as in, well, that's all it is. It's very difficult. It's tricky. You have to do a lot of muscle memory work to make that happen. And there's a lot of nuance and choreography. And there's also a lot of aesthetics that go into cardistry in terms of the dance motion, right? There's a particular way that you need to move to make it look as effortless as it should look, even though it's clearly not, right? That is real magic in my mind. We can only aspire to do those things in the performance of a magical effect. We often think as magicians, as magic as being merely just doing something that is impossible. How could you know that information when it was kept from you, right? And yet you reveal it. That's impossible. And we think of that as being magic, but I think there's a higher level of magic, and you can take that kind of magic, just the mere exhibition of something that is impossible, and you can make it real magic by adding the aesthetic layer, the surreal experience, the exhibition of something that seems like a difficult or impossible task. You can elevate it. And one of the ways you do this is with talking, and not merely talking, but a particular kind of talking. So what kind of talking is good? I think we are wrong when we say that just talking and spending time on process-heavy presentations gets in the way of the magic. I think that's dead wrong. I think that is a completely wrong blanket assertion. And the reason why I say that is because it denies the fact that there's other art forms that are quite magical, right? To say that is to say that there's no such thing as poetry. It's to say that there's no such thing as music. It's to say that there's no such thing as storytelling. It's to say that there's no such thing as comedy. It suggests that there's no such thing as the sharing of an experience, a piece of nonfiction, right, that seems unbelievable. Again, that's storytelling. Or fiction, right? It's to say that none of these things are exist, or really worse yet, it's almost as if to say that magic, the performance of a magical effect, is above all of those things. That cannot be true. And I think we ought to be careful when we say, well, something that's process heavy suffers because it is process heavy. What really suffers is your presentation is garbage. Okay, I'm just going to say it. If you find that this is a problem, that you can't captivate somebody with something that is process heavy, the problem isn't the thing. The problem isn't the process. The problem is you. You're the problem. You're in the way. Your process is not believable. It's not captivating. It's not interesting. If you can make it believable, captivating, and interesting, then it can't get in the way. In fact, it can only do one thing. It can make the effect much, much better. So how do we do this? What do we do to get there? What kind of talking is bad? I think narration of self-evident action is bad, and that's what I was alluding to on that last video. Whenever you're narrating self-evident things, and now we're going to cut the cards. Just cut the cards. I think it's bad to do that, especially whenever what you're doing has no purpose, right? We return the card to the deck, and then we give it some cuts. How many times have I heard magicians say that, right? It's a very... I don't want to say it's a very elementary kind. I've even done it, right? We've all done it. We've all done that kind of thing. I don't want to say that it's an elementary sort of tactic, because I think that elementary magic tricks are better than most people think they are, right? There's a lot of beginner magic tricks we wrongly call beginner magic tricks that are killer tricks and shouldn't be. shouldn't be suggested that they are for kids or for elementary or for the beginner, right? I think that narration, it's really, I think we want to call it less mature. It's immature magic, right? It's not experienced. It lacks that kind of perspective. So whenever you have cards, and especially if you need to cut the deck to do the method relies on the cutting of the deck. The last thing you want to be saying is articulating, let's give it a couple cuts. What you ought to do is just cut the thing and it completely ignore the action, right? Later on the good talking side, which I'll mention in a second, is the recap. Recap is good talking. Some people argue about whether or not recap is good. Some people recap just to do it. They just fill time. I don't think that's necessarily good. But if you're recapping with the purpose of making the recollection of the events better and more deceptive, recapping can only be good, right? If that's your goal. You want to talk about how, remember, we mixed up the cards. That's when you bring it up, but not in the moment. You don't want to be narrating self-evident action, and you certainly don't want to be narrating actions that facilitate the method. If you have to false shuffle the cards to facilitate the method or to disguise the method, you shouldn't be talking about how you are going to shuffle the cards. You should just shuffle the cards while talking about something completely different. That in my view, is a much better process, right? That's bad talking. So when I say talk less, I mean don't do that stuff. You want to avoid that stuff because it tips off the method. It's redundant. It just begs questions from the audience whenever you're doing things like that. Well, why do you have to cut the deck, right? You know, when you could just do it, not mention it, and it doesn't, not only does it not raise suspicion, but it also, because it is self-evident, it looks like something that makes it more impossible. Hopefully, that's the goal, right? Good talking. Okay, that's the bad. Here's the good. Storytelling is always good. I say storytelling is always good because there's such a thing as storytelling. People who say, oh, I can't stand those magic tricks where they tell a big, long story. Well, your problem is you don't like storytelling, but I hate to tell you, storytelling is a thing, right? There are people that just tell, that's what they do for a living. That is their art form, is that they tell stories. And it's for everybody. It's not something that's just for a kind of a niche of people that like to go listen to stories. Everybody likes to hear stories. We all like to hear stories because we all tell stories. We talk about our day. We talk about what we experienced here. We talk about what we saw in the news. We talk about this ridiculous video we saw on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. We tell stories all the time, and we love stories. Storytelling is a thing. And if you can incorporate storytelling into your magic, you can't make it worse, right? Unless your storytelling is bad, which I'll explain how we can make it better here in a minute. Talking is good whenever you're giving specific directions. There are a lot of things, the you do as I do or the spectator does all of the work kind of trick. Those sort of tricks, they require specific directions. If you don't give very specific, articulate directions, it can all go bad very quickly. So, good talking is whenever you're saying exactly what needs to be heard, and you're saying only what needs to be heard, and it's very specific. That is good talking whenever we're doing those things. Recapping what has occurred and putting it in the best light, that is good talking. Whenever we are talking about what we've already done, we're putting it in the best light. We are calibrating the memory of our spectators to recall things in a better way than what it actually was. That's good talking. You can only benefit from that. Again, obviously, you have to be good at it. You have to be clear. You cannot just talk about what has happened and give a very bad account that people will dispute, right? You can't say things that are absolutely untrue. You have to say things that are pseudologically correct, right? A pseudologically correct accounting of what has happened, but it gives a slant that is slightly better than what really happened. That's how you have to do your recap, right? That's good talking. This is when you want to talk. This is when you want to tell your story. And when you do these things, process-heavy presentations become great. They don't become tolerated. They become great, right? If you can captivate, I just did the Mark Paul thing with a receipt and the numbers, and there's a lot of, the spectator makes a lot of decisions. You write down numbers, like an 8-minute presentation with one effect at the end. If you present that with a realism to it, and you get into that surreal zone, right? And there's kind of an aesthetic storytelling that's going on, that can be an extremely good trick. It's not just something sterile that someone, one of the comments, I'm not bashing the comment, but I just have to be honest about it. If you do this for really smart people or engineers, I don't perform for engineers, right? I can't even count on one hand the number of engineers that I know, right? And even then, I'll be honest with you, I've known some very smart people that do some really dumb stuff. Just because somebody is good with mathematics or someone who is good with spatial reasoning doesn't mean that they see everything, right? It's again about the presentation, and also it's about the involvement. Someone who is directly involved in doing something and taking directions and responding to directions to accomplish a task that's been assigned to them, it's very difficult for them to see what they're doing in the moment. Okay? I can tell you as a teacher, I cannot adjudicate my teaching best while I'm doing it. I adjudicate my teaching best in reflection, right? I adjudicate my teaching best when my boss comes in to observe me and I get to talk to them about how the lesson went. I adjudicate my teaching best when I record myself and then I watch that back and I say, I should have handled that differently, right? It's always in the after. It's always in the self-reflection. It's not in the moment. And in a magical effect, you really want to tie people into the moment and not give opportunity for any afterthought. If you can do that, then really you can take in the smartest engineer that you know on some of the simplest math tricks that you can find. It can be done. It's done all the time. It's done all the time. Okay. So if you are telling a story, process-heavy presentations can be amazing. Not just tolerated, not just tolerable, but they can be some of the best magic that you do. Do not shy away from gambling demonstrations where you have to deal cards or where the spectator has to deal, right? I've made that criticism myself. I know really whenever I make the criticism, really what I'm giving up is I'm saying what I'm not comfortable with myself doing. That's really what I'm saying. And maybe in self-reflection, what I need to do is I need to say, well, I'm not comfortable doing that. Maybe I need to think about how I could do that and make it comfortable for me so that I would get away with it and be able to do that kind of magic. Maybe the problem's me. It's not really the magic, right? At the same time, I do recognize not everything's for everybody. Okay. So you're going to find, well, it's just not my style. It's not the way people know me to do my magic. It doesn't fit what I do. That's absolutely up to you, but I just want to get out there that there is potential for anybody to do this kind of presentation. So how do you do this? Let's say you're bad at the storytelling, right? You're bad at the talking, that sort of seemingly extemporaneous part that adds aesthetic value and interest to your magic. Well, first thing you can do is self-talk. Talk to yourself. Go through your scripting and do it with nobody there. We often, I think the hobbyist will often, and even a lot of professionals, will focus on the mechanics of what they're doing and getting the muscle memory down because that's what we are most concerned about. But we ought to practice the speech. We ought to practice the script. And get it automatic. Okay, so some self-talk. Not just that kind of self-talk, but real self-talk. Try this. Tell a true story to yourself. When you already know, tell yourself a story about something that you've already experienced, something that happened years ago. I was at an amusement park with a friend one time, and I remember as we were walking down the midway, this clown came out, and it was just, the clown looked ridiculous. It had Do this to yourself. Tell yourself a story about an experience that you had and pay close attention to your cadence. How do you tell the story? How do you talk honestly about something? Record yourself doing it. Talk to yourself in a camera, right? Get that so that you can analyze what the real you looks like when you're really communicating and telling a story. One big problem with politicians that you'll note is that a lot of politicians, when they give speeches, you can tell it's all a script. It's all fake. Whereas when you look back, whatever your politics, I mean, it doesn't matter how you feel about the people I bring up, but when you look at someone like a Ronald Reagan, right, or even a Bill Clinton, some of these people who are really, really good. And never mind how you feel about the people. I'm not getting into politics, but just these are personalities that everyone knows, right? If you lived during that time. But you take like these two presidents who are obviously not at all alike in most ways. They were quite good communicators. One of them was known as the Great Communicator, right? Was what he was known for. Whenever they talked to the camera and they were giving their speeches, there was a sense that they were really talking to people. There was this kind of extemporaneous speech that was going on there, as if what you were hearing them say, they were saying for the first time, and it was really important. That's what you're after. Many politicians fail at that, right? Many teachers fail at that. Many people who have to stand up in front of other people to give talks, they fail at this, and we have to be good at it. You want to make your magic rely a bit on that, the ability to talk in a truthful manner that looks like it is honest and in the moment, even though it is completely scripted. So tell yourself a real story about an experience that you had, a true story, record yourself doing that, and pay close attention to what it looks like, the cadence of your speech, how you inflect words and whatnot. Another thing is try to explain the plot of a movie to somebody who's not seen it, right? So go through the process of saying, have you seen this movie? It's great. Here's the plot. It started with this. Do some storytelling of your own on something that you know well. Without a script, just trying to think through the plot and the order of events and explain it to somebody else. It could be a book. It could be a story. It could be any kind of plot. And try to do it within, 5 or 10 minutes and explain that to them. And go through it and pay close attention to your inflection. You're trying to describe a story and deliver a plot as if you're telling a story to somebody, okay? And you're doing it in the moment and you're doing it for real. As an exercise, read simple stories as if they are true. Read simple stories with simple scripts as if they are real. If you have kids, you probably read books to them, right? Curious George and the Bunny, right? I've got kids. I read books all the time to them. If you're a reader and you read out loud or whatever, you listen to book on tape or audiobook tape. No one has tape, but audiobooks, right? You listen to that kind of thing. Usually the narration is of a certain kind of quality where it feels like it has a great deal of verisimilitude, some truth to it, some reality to it, right? If you are just reading your book, here is the beginning of Curious George and the Bunny. This is going to seem weird to you, okay? But I'm dead serious about this, right? Here's the beginning. This is George. George is a good little monkey and always very curious. One day, George found a little house. Inside was a mother bunny and all her baby bunnies. Now, you probably read your books to your kids like that if you have kids, or you've been read to like that, or you would read, to someone like that or tell a story in that way. What I'm saying is true. I'm reading what's on the page, right? I'm delivering the story and the plot is coming out. But try this. Try to read that story as if it's real. Like it's something that you witnessed. You were there, you saw it, or you were party to what was going on, right? And it might look something more like this. So there was George, right? George was he was a good monkey, but he was always quite curious, the kind, right? One day, George, he was outside. He found this little house, and inside there was a mother bunny, and not just a mother bunny. There's a bunch of baby bunnies in there too. Okay, this is a real story. If I'm reading this to my kids, just the way I do it, right? This is George. George is a good little monkey and always very curious. One day, George found a little house, and inside the house was a mother bunny and all of her baby bunnies. That's how you read to your kids. Okay, if you're not doing that, they're missing out. You should try to give reality to it. Magic is found in the aesthetics. Real magic. not an effect, not a method, but the real experience of that spine tingly, warm fuzzies kind of stuff. It's found in the aesthetics of what you're doing. And that is not something often found in the method or in the effect itself. It's found in everything else around it. Okay. So we're trying to raise the surreal. We're trying to make more of an exhibition of reality. That's what we're after. So talking is bad unless it's good, right? Process magic, heavy process magic is bad if you're bad at it. But it can be the best kind of magic if you take the time to tell a story. If you take the time to do the real magic, the real art form stuff, that those other disciplines that exist out there in the performing arts, besides just the presentation of effect with a method. So that's my shtick for today. My thoughts, again, just my thoughts and how I feel about it. These are my opinions. You can go ahead and comment below any other ideas that you have. But those are my recommendations, right? Read simple stories, record yourself, try to be real, try to explain things in a way, think things that are fiction and explain them as if they happened, the way that you would really tell a story. Work on that. Do process heavy magic and try to incorporate engagement into it that people just cannot turn away from. That's your goal. That's what you want to do. This doesn't get delivered very well on YouTube, right? The only way you're going to really feel this is whenever you go do it for real people. You know, this is when you see me do magic on this channel, it's always very sterile. I can try to speak to you in this way, but you all know the dynamics of having a real person there, right? It's one thing for me to talk about picking numbers and saying a spectator could do this or that or this. And then you say, well, people would see right through that. It's another thing for me to take a person and say, well, you can see all these receipts are very different. I bought a few things over here and some other stuff over here, different totals, and I spent probably way too much money that day. Just pick one. We need to use one of these here. And they pick one out, right? I'm telling them something very important to the effect, but I'm engaging them in the story, in the explanation, right? And then it's another thing to do it on video. Another thing for me to have a spectator and say, let's just look at the numbers here of the items, the prices. Can you just pick a number from here, and why don't you just write this down on the pad, right? And why don't you pick another one down here? They're thinking about what number do I pick and where do I write it down? That's their concern. You got to remember that. You got to remember that when you do these effects, people get lost in the moment. I shared a watch effect. I wear a cheap minimalist watch that doesn't have any numbers on it, just so I can do the old reverse clock trick, right? And I've done this so many times. I've never been called out for it, and it's a really stupid, easy method. Smart people ought to know better, but I've had a lot of smart people not catch this, right? Where I've moved the time and changed the hands. All I did was turn the watch upside down. They didn't know. They didn't see it, right? They're in the moment. They're engaged. They're thinking about the story I'm telling. They're thinking about the pattern. They're thinking about answering the question that I've asked. That's how con men work. That's how con men work. Con men don't work on the mailing that they send to your house. That's just the hook. They work on sending the mailing to your house and then getting you to respond with an email and get into a conversation or making a phone call. It's the conversation. It's the interaction. It's the directive. That's the misdirection. It's the engagement. It's the story. It's the other art forms. It's not the effect. It's not the method. It's everything else. That's what we really want to focus on to make our magic real magic, really magical. So good luck with that. Happy magicking.